Princess Kaelis of the Velanthari Empire stood on the ceremonial platform in the Grand Hall, wearing formal robes woven with threads that caught light and shimmered like captured starlight. Her expression carefully neutral as she prepared to deliver yet another rejection. This would be her 43rd suitor in 5 years. She'd been keeping count, partially from grim amusement and partially because the absurdity of the number made the endless parade of suitable matches feel less suffocating. Lord Thuron stood below the platform, resplendent in military dress uniform, adorned with medals indicating distinguished service in border conflicts. His family crest prominently displayed to remind everyone present of his ancient lineage and considerable wealth. He was objectively impressive by every traditional Velanthari measure. Accomplished warrior, strategic thinker, from one of the oldest noble houses, and physically attractive with the characteristic Velanthari height and elegant build. His elongated ears were positioned in confident attention, his bioluminescent skin patterns displayed in the formal blue-gold that indicated high status and serious intent. He delivered his courtship proposal with practiced eloquence, speaking of mutual advantage, of how their union would strengthen military alliances between their houses, of the children they would produce who would carry both their distinguished bloodlines forward, of his respect for her position, and his commitment to supporting her eventual rule. It was perfectly calibrated diplomatic speech, hitting every traditional point expected in formal courtship proposals. The assembled court, hundreds of nobles in formal attire, arranged by rank and family affiliation, watched with intense interest, many probably wagering privately on whether this would finally be the match the stubborn princess accepted. Kaelis listened with the patient expression she'd perfected over 5 years of these ceremonies, her own ears tilted in the position indicating polite attention, her bioluminescent patterns carefully controlled to show nothing of what she was actually feeling. What she was feeling was a bone-deep weariness at yet another proposal that treated her as political asset rather than person, another suitor who spoke eloquently about duty and dynasty, but said nothing suggesting he saw her as Kaelis rather than just crown princess. Lord Thuron finished his speech and looked up at her with expression mixing confidence and slight anxiety. He knew her reputation for refusals, but he clearly believed his superior qualifications would succeed where others had failed. Kaelis drew breath to deliver her standard rejection, the diplomatic phrases she'd memorized from repetition. But before she could speak, her mother, Empress Celiara, interjected from her throne beside Emperor Vorath. "Perhaps, daughter, you would like more time to consider Lord Thuron's generous offer. He has traveled far and prepared thoroughly. Surely such effort deserves more than immediate dismissal." It was gentle rebuke disguised as suggestion, reminding Kaelis that her pattern of instant refusals was becoming embarrassing to the imperial family. Kaelis met her mother's eyes and saw the frustration beneath diplomatic composure. With careful formality, she addressed Lord Thuron. "Your offer honors me, Lord Thuron. Your accomplishments are notable, and your house is worthy of deepest respect. However, I find I cannot accept courtship at this time. I require further consideration before making such significant commitment. Please accept my gratitude for your interest and understanding of my position." The standard rejection, delivered flawlessly, and Lord Thuron's expression went carefully blank in that way Velanthari nobles had when suppressing disappointment or anger. He bowed formally and withdrew, and the court buzzed with whispered conversations about the princess's continued impossible standards. After the ceremony concluded and the hall emptied, Kaelis was summoned to private audience with her parents in the imperial chamber, a room designed for frank family discussions rather than state business, though the two were increasingly indistinguishable when it came to Kaelis's marriage prospects. Emperor Vorath, normally the more diplomatic parent, was struggling visibly to maintain composure. "Kaelis, this cannot continue indefinitely. You understand that, yes? Your duty as crown princess includes providing for succession, strengthening alliances through bonding, demonstrating to our people and other houses that you're capable of making necessary political decisions, even when they might not align perfectly with personal preference. I understand my duties, Father. I have never suggested otherwise. Kaelis kept her voice respectful but firm. Empress Celiara was more direct, her diplomatic training allowing her to cut to core issues without hostility. Then help us understand what you're waiting for. Lord Thuron was exceptional by every measure: accomplished, appropriate status, acceptable age, physically attractive, politically advantageous. Yet you rejected him as quickly as you've rejected all the others. What exactly are you seeking that these nobles cannot provide? It was the question that had been building for years, delivered now with genuine confusion and frustration rather than anger. Kaelis tried to articulate something she barely understood herself. I want to feel something beyond political calculation. Every suitor who's been presented speaks eloquently about duty, about advantage, about producing suitable heirs. None of them have spoken to me as Kaelis. They address Crown Princess, and they want a bond with title and position, not with person. I cannot commit my entire life to someone who sees me only as strategic asset, no matter how suitable they are by traditional measures. That is luxury commoners can afford, her mother said bluntly. Royalty must think beyond personal satisfaction. Your grandmother bonded with my father because their houses needed alliance. They developed genuine affection over time, but the initial commitment was duty. This is how royal marriages have functioned for millennia. Personal feelings are secondary to needs of empire. Then perhaps empire's needs should evolve to include allowing its rulers to bond with people they genuinely want rather than people spreadsheet indicates are optimal matches, Kaelis said, and regretted the sharp tone immediately when she saw her father's ears tilt back in disapproval. You are confined to palace grounds until you demonstrate more mature understanding of your responsibilities, Emperor Vorath said formally. We will resume discussions about suitable matches when you've had time to reflect on importance of your position. Kaelis bowed formally and withdrew, returning to her chambers feeling trapped and frustrated and wondering if she'd spend her entire life rejecting suitable suitors while waiting for something she couldn't even properly define. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Ambassador Marcus Reid was standing in a transport shuttle looking down at Earth, feeling mixture of excitement and terror about his first major diplomatic posting. He'd been working toward this his entire career: smaller postings on human colonies, trade negotiations with minor species, years of studying xenodiplomacy and cultural integration. Now Earth's government was trusting him with establishing formal relations with the Velanthari Empire, a civilization that controlled significant resources and trade routes humanity desperately needed access to. Marcus had spent months preparing, studying Velanthari culture and protocols with obsessive attention to detail, learning their formal language though he'd probably never be fluent enough to handle complex negotiations without translation assistance, memorizing the intricate hierarchy of their noble houses and the political factions that influenced imperial policy. He knew intellectually that he was as prepared as anyone could be for this assignment, but emotionally he felt profoundly inadequate. The Velanthari were known for their rigid adherence to protocol, their tendency to view younger species as unsophisticated, their extremely hierarchical social structure that made navigating court politics treacherous for outsiders. One wrong move, one inadvertent insult, and he could set back human Velanthari relations by years. His supervisor, Director Chen, had given him final briefing before departure that was simultaneously encouraging and terrifying. Ambassador Reid, you've been selected for this posting because you have demonstrated exceptional cultural sensitivity and genuine curiosity about other species rather than just strategic manipulation. The Velanthari respect authenticity even when they disagree with positions being presented. Be yourself, Be honest about what you don't understand. Show genuine respect for their customs even when they seem excessive to human sensibilities, and you'll do fine. Probably, possibly. We're all hoping very hard that you'll do fine because if this goes poorly, we've set back our diplomatic efforts significantly. That's tremendously reassuring, Director. I feel much more confident now. Marcus had responded with the slightly sarcastic humor that characterized his communication style, and Director Chen had actually smiled. I know the pressure is enormous, but remember, they agreed to receive a human ambassador, which means they're at least somewhat open to establishing relations. They could have continued ignoring us. The fact that they're willing to engage is positive sign. Don't catastrophize before you even arrive. Now, watching Earth recede as the shuttle accelerated toward the jump point that would take him to Velanthari space, Marcus was absolutely catastrophizing. He was running through every possible scenario where he'd make catastrophic diplomatic error, accidentally insulting someone of high rank, using wrong form of address, committing some cultural taboo he hadn't learned about despite months of study. He was going to meet beings whose civilization was thousands of years older than humanity's, whose social structures were so complex that human sociologists were still trying to fully map them, whose technology in many areas exceeded anything Earth had achieved. And he was supposed to represent humanity as their equal, convince them that humans were worth forming meaningful alliances with rather than just tolerating as minor players in galactic politics. The shuttle AI announced they were approaching the jump point, and Marcus closed his eyes, took steadying breath, and reminded himself of something his mentor had told him years ago. Diplomacy isn't about being perfect. It's about being genuine, being willing to listen, being flexible enough to find common ground while holding firm on core principles. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be sincerely committed to understanding and being understood. He held onto that thought as the shuttle jumped, reality distorting around him in ways that always made his stomach uncomfortable, and emerged in Velanthari space, where an escort vessel was waiting to guide him to the capital world. Through the viewport, he could see Velanth Prime, a planet that looked like someone had designed it specifically to be beautiful, with glittering cities visible even from orbit, massive structures that seemed to grow organically from the landscape, and atmospheric conditions that created constantly shifting auroras across both hemispheres. It was breathtaking and intimidating, and Marcus felt a wave of inadequacy wash over him again. Then he squared his shoulders, checked his formal attire one final time to ensure everything was correct according to Velanthari diplomatic protocols, and prepared to dock with the escort vessel. He was here. He was humanity's representative. He was going to do his absolute best to make this work. And somewhere on the planet below, Princess Kaelis was pacing in her chambers, frustrated by another day of confinement and wondering if she'd ever find what she was looking for, completely unaware that in 10 days she would meet someone who would change everything with one simple, impulsive word. Marcus's first week at the Velanthari court was simultaneously fascinating and absolutely terrifying in ways his training hadn't fully prepared him for. The palace complex was enormous, more like a small city than a single building, with wings dedicated to different governmental functions, elaborate gardens that seemed to blend architecture with living ecosystems, and ceremonial spaces that made human government buildings look modest by comparison. Everything was designed with aesthetic precision that bordered on overwhelming, with bioluminescent plants providing ambient lighting, water features creating constant pleasant background sound, and art integrated into every surface in ways that made even walking down a corridor feel like visiting a museum. He was assigned quarters that were objectively luxurious, but felt slightly wrong dimensionally, ceilings too high for human comfort, furniture sized for taller Velanthari bodies, ambient temperature set for Velanthari preference which was slightly cooler than Marcus found ideal. He adapted, adjusting environmental controls where possible and accepting discomfort where it wasn't, aware that demanding changes to accommodate human preferences might come across as demanding special treatment he hadn't earned. His cultural liaison, a Velanthari diplomat named Kaelis who'd volunteered for the assignment out of genuine curiosity about humans, helped him navigate the social minefield that was daily life at court. The most important thing to remember, Kaelis explained during their second day, is that every interaction at court is observed and analyzed. Velanthari communication relies heavily on context, subtext, and nonverbal cues that humans often miss. Your species' tendency toward direct communication is refreshing, but can be perceived as crude or inappropriate in formal settings. You'll need to learn to read ear positions, bioluminescent patterns, and posture cues if you want to truly understand what's being communicated versus what's being said. Kaelis demonstrated various ear positions and pattern shifts, and Marcus tried desperately to memorize them while simultaneously thinking that this was impossible, and he was going to fail spectacularly at some crucial moment. His actual diplomatic work, negotiating preliminary trade agreements, establishing protocols for future human-Velanthari cooperation, discussing resource access and technological exchange, was progressing slowly but steadily. He attended endless formal meetings where elaborate courtesy dances preceded any substantial discussion, where hours might be spent on protocols before getting to actual agenda items, where indirect suggestion was preferred over direct request. It was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but Marcus found himself genuinely fascinated by Velanthari culture even when he didn't understand it. He asked questions not just for strategic intelligence, but because he genuinely wanted to understand how their society functioned, what values shaped their worldview, how their history had created their current political structures. His approach, treating Velanthari as equals rather than superiors or inferiors whose goodwill needed to be courted through false flattery, asking questions out of genuine curiosity rather than strategic manipulation, showing flexibility and willingness to compromise while maintaining human interests, gradually earned him respect from officials he worked with regularly. He was developing reputation as the reasonable human, someone who could be dealt with honestly because he dealt honestly with others. It wasn't the triumph he'd hoped for. These were lower-level officials, not the imperial family or high nobility who actually made major decisions. But it was progress, and he'd learned in his career that diplomatic success was built on accumulating many small victories rather than expecting dramatic breakthroughs. The formal presentation ceremony was scheduled for his 10th day at court, and Marcus spent the week leading up to it in increasingly anxious preparation. Presentation ceremonies were when visiting dignitaries were formally introduced to the imperial family, a ritual that required perfect execution of complex protocols. It wasn't a negotiation session or policy discussion, just formal acknowledgement that he was present and recognized by the empire. But cultural significance was enormous. Making error during presentation could set tone for his entire mission, marking him as incompetent or disrespectful in ways that would undermine all his other work. Kaelis drilled him relentlessly on proper procedures. The specific type of bow required for greeting royalty, the formal phrases in high Velanthari that must be spoken exactly correctly, the appropriate distance to maintain, the correct duration of eye contact, brief acknowledgement but not sustained staring which would be considered aggressive, the proper posture and hand positioning. Marcus practiced until he could execute the sequence in his sleep, terrified that when the moment actually came his mind would go blank and he'd forget everything. The day of the ceremony arrived, and Marcus dressed in his formal diplomatic attire, human formal wear adapted slightly to Velanthari aesthetic preferences, showing respect for their culture while maintaining his own identity as human representative. He stood in the antechamber with other dignitaries awaiting presentation, trying to control his breathing and remind himself that he'd prepared thoroughly and just needed to execute what he'd practiced. When his name was announced, translated into High Velanthari with his titles and credentials, he walked forward with what he hoped was appropriate, confident but not arrogant bearing, approached the throne platform where the imperial family sat in full ceremonial regalia. Emperor Vorath sat in the center, imposing figure whose ears and bearing communicated absolute authority tempered with diplomatic openness. Empress Celiara sat to his right, elegant and perceptive in ways that made Marcus feel like she was analyzing his every micro-expression. And to the emperor's left sat Princess Kaelis, and Marcus's carefully memorized protocols almost fled his mind completely, because she was the most striking person he'd ever seen. She was tall even by Velanthari standards, wearing robes that incorporated living bioluminescent elements creating constantly shifting light patterns. Her ears positioned in formal neutral attention, her expression carefully composed in royal inscrutability. But there was something in her eyes, intelligence, curiosity, maybe weariness with endless formality, that made her seem less like untouchable royal figure and more like person trapped in elaborate ceremonial prison. Marcus executed his practiced bow, the specific angle and duration required for greeting crown princess, then spoke his prepared phrases in High Velanthari. Imperial family of the Velanthari Empire, I come before you as representative of humanity, seeking to establish relations of mutual respect and beneficial cooperation between our peoples. I am honored by your willingness to receive me and commit myself to serving as bridge between our civilizations. The phrases were formal and traditional, exactly what protocol required, and he delivered them with as much polish as his non-native pronunciation allowed. He looked up to make the brief eye contact protocol required, first emperor, then empress, then princess. And when his eyes met Princess Kaelis's, something shifted in her expression. Her ears tilted forward sharply, in position Chorus had taught him, indicated sudden intense interest or surprise. Her bioluminescent patterns flared through rapid color changes that he couldn't fully interpret but which clearly indicated strong emotional reaction. She stared at him for longer than protocol allowed, and Marcus wondered if he'd somehow committed error he wasn't aware of, if he'd accidentally done something offensive that was about to become diplomatic incident. Then Princess Kaelis said, clearly and distinctly, "Yes." The entire hall went absolutely silent. Marcus blinked, confused because he hadn't asked a question. He delivered formal greeting. There was no question to answer with yes. He looked to Chorus for guidance, and saw his liaison had gone completely pale in that way Velanthari did, when their bioluminescent patterns shut down from shock. Emperor Vorath was staring at his daughter with expression mixing shock and something that might have been horror. Empress Celiara's carefully controlled diplomatic mask had cracked into visible disbelief. Marcus stood frozen, having no idea what had just happened but absolutely certain it was significant. Princess Kaelis was still staring at him, her patterns now shifting through colors indicating embarrassment, shock at herself, but also something else, determination, maybe defiance. Her ears were moving through complicated sequence that Marcus couldn't interpret at all. Finally, she stood from her throne with that elegant Velanthari grace and addressed him directly, which apparently also wasn't protocol because there was audible gasp from assembled courtiers. "Ambassador Reid, I appear to have just accepted your suit." This was not entirely intentional, but it was not entirely unintentional either. "Would you be amenable to formal courtship proceedings?" Her voice was steady despite the emotional chaos visible in her patterns and ear positions. Marcus's brain was moving extremely slowly, trying to process words that seemed to be arranged in a way that made sense individually but collectively created impossible statement. "Your Highness, I'm honored. I think. Could you perhaps clarify what exactly has just occurred because I'm genuinely uncertain what the proper response is, and I'm desperately trying not to commit diplomatic disaster through misunderstanding." He was aware this wasn't probably appropriate. Marcus looked at her, really looked past the formal royal figure to the person beneath, and saw someone who appeared simultaneously certain and terrified of what she'd just done, someone whose ears were trembling slightly despite her controlled bearing, someone whose patterns were shifting in ways suggesting hope mixed with anxiety. And he made decision based entirely on instinct, something Director Chen had advised him to do when facing completely unexpected situations. Your Highness, I would be genuinely honored to court you, though I should warn you that I have absolutely no idea what Velanthari courtship entails and will probably make numerous embarrassing mistakes throughout the process. If you're willing to accept that I'm learning as I go, then yes, I'm willing to try. The court erupted into chaos, some celebrating, some protesting loudly, many simply shocked into confused conversation. Emperor Voreth stood and called for immediate recess to private chambers, gesturing sharply for Princess Kaelis and for Marcus to follow. And Marcus walked toward the private corridor, still not entirely certain what had just happened, but absolutely sure his mission had just become infinitely more complicated than anyone in Earth's diplomatic corps had prepared him for. The emergency family conference in the Imperial private chambers was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of Marcus's diplomatic career, and he'd once had to mediate dispute between two colonial governors who hated each other so intensely they'd refused to be in same room. Emperor Voreth paced, something that apparently Velanthari royalty almost never did, indicating his emotional state was agitated enough that even his legendary composure was cracking. Empress Celiara sat with rigid stillness that somehow communicated even more intense emotion than her husband's pacing. Princess Kaelis stood with formal bearing, but her ears were tilted in that stubborn, determined position Marcus was learning indicated she'd made decision and wasn't backing down regardless of consequences. And Marcus stood near the door, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible while being fully aware that he was center of the crisis. Kaelis, you have rejected 42 suitable Velanthari nobles over 5 years. Now you accept a human diplomat you have known for precisely 30 seconds. Explain the reasoning behind this decision, Emperor Voreth said, his voice controlled but his patterns displaying colors Marcus's limited understanding suggested indicated anger mixed with confusion. Kaelis met her father's eyes steadily. I cannot explain it with pure logic, father, but for the first time in 5 years of evaluating suitors, I felt something beyond political calculation. Ambassador Reid looked at me and saw me, not just my title. In that moment, I knew I wanted to know him better. The yes was impulsive, but the desire behind it was genuine. Even accepting that you felt some attraction, which is understandable, he presents well and seems competent. You could have approached this more diplomatically, Empress Celiara interjected. You could have requested private audience with him later, explored possibility of connection without public declaration. Now you have committed yourself publicly to courting a human. If this fails, it becomes scandal affecting imperial dignity. If it succeeds, you will be bonding outside our species, which creates succession complications and political controversy. You have made this exponentially more difficult than necessary. I know, Mother, but for once in my life, I did something because I wanted to rather than because it was strategically optimal. And it felt right in ways that none of the suitable matches ever did. Kaelis's patterns shifted through colors suggesting defiance mixed with vulnerability. Emperor Voreth turned his attention to Marcus, who had been trying to stay invisible, but now found himself under intense royal scrutiny. Ambassador Reid, you are aware that accepting this courtship has implications far beyond personal relationship. You are now courting Crown Princess of Velanthari Empire. Every action you take will be analyzed by both our species. You will be under constant scrutiny. If you fail to meet expectations, either ours or your own people's, the consequences extend beyond personal disappointment to diplomatic complications between our civilizations. Do you fully grasp the weight of what you have agreed to? Marcus swallowed, aware that his next words were crucial. Your Majesty, I understand the significance, though I admit I'm still processing the full implications. I did not come to Velanth Prime expecting to court anyone, let alone crown princess. But refusing Princess Kaelis' offer in that public setting would have been diplomatic disaster regardless of my personal feelings. And honestly, he paused, knowing he was about to be extremely honest in a way that might be unwise but also felt necessary. Princess Kaelis is remarkable. I've been here only 10 days, haven't had opportunity to truly know her. But in that moment when she made her offer, I saw someone brave enough to choose what she wanted despite knowing it would create massive complications. That's admirable. If there's genuine possibility that we could build something real while also strengthening human Velanthari relations, isn't that worth the risk and scrutiny? That is remarkably optimistic perspective, Empress Celiara said dryly. You could also catastrophically fail and create scandal that damages relations between our peoples for years. Are you prepared for that possibility? No, Your Majesty, I'm not. But I'm also not prepared to refuse opportunity to know your daughter better simply because failure is possible. Nothing worth achieving comes without risk. Marcus was aware he was being somewhat presumptuous, but at this point, honesty seemed like his best strategy. There was long silence while the Emperor and Empress communicated through looks and subtle pattern shifts that Marcus couldn't fully interpret. Finally, Emperor Voreth sighed, a very human gesture that somehow made him seem more approachable. Very well, we will allow courtship to proceed under observation. Ambassador Reid, you will be assigned cultural advisor who will ensure you understand Velanthari courtship protocols. The courtship will follow traditional stages, each requiring successful completion before proceeding to next level. At any point, if either you or Kaelis wish to end courtship, you may do so without penalty beyond the political complications that already exist. Are these terms acceptable? Yes, Your Majesty, more than acceptable. I'm grateful for the opportunity. See that you don't make us regret this decision. Kaelis, we will discuss this further in private, but for now, you may introduce Ambassador Reid to basic courtship expectations. The Emperor dismissed them with gesture that managed to be both permission and warning, and Marcus followed Kaelis out of the private chambers, still somewhat dazed by how quickly his entire mission had transformed. They walked in silence through palace corridors until reaching one of the garden courtyards where they had some privacy, but were still technically in public space with decorum expected. Kaelis finally spoke. I apologize for putting you in that position. It was not my intention to complicate your diplomatic mission or to trap you into agreement you may not have genuinely wanted. You didn't trap me, Marcus said honestly. I could have found diplomatic way to refuse if I truly wanted to. But Your Highness, Kaelis, if I may use your name in private, I didn't want to refuse. Yes, this is complicated and unexpected and possibly insane, but it's also the most interesting thing that's happened in my diplomatic career, and you're the most intriguing person I've met in any system. So I meant what I said. I want to try this if you do. Kaelis's patterns shifted toward warmer colors, and her ears tilted in position that looked like pleased surprise. I want to try as well. Though I should warn you that Velanthari courtship is structured process with specific stages and expectations. It will not be informal human-style dating, where you simply spend time together without protocols. I'm starting to realize that everything in Velanthari culture involves intricate protocols, but I'm willing to learn if you're willing to be patient with my mistakes. They spent the next hour discussing what Velanthari courtship actually involved, and Marcus's head was spinning by the end of it. There were formal stages of increasing intimacy. Initial meetings with chaperones present where they could converse but not touch, followed by walks in public gardens with slightly more privacy, then eventually private conversations with less supervision, then finally formal commitment discussions leading to bonding ceremony if they chose to proceed that far. Each stage had specific protocols about appropriate topics of conversation, acceptable physical proximity, proper behavior. It was elaborate and rigid by human standards, but Kaelis explained it was designed to allow both parties to evaluate compatibility thoroughly before making permanent commitment. Over the following weeks, they navigated the formal courtship structure while trying to actually get to know each other as people beneath all the protocols. Their first several meetings were painfully formal, sitting in receiving rooms with chaperones observing, making carefully neutral conversation about art and philosophy and cultural differences, both of them hyper-aware of scrutiny. But gradually, they found ways to have genuine conversations within the formal structure. Marcus asked about Velanthari history and culture, not just for diplomatic knowledge, but because he was genuinely curious how their society developed. Kaelis asked about Earth and human customs, and seemed fascinated by human emotional expressiveness and informal social structures. They discovered they were both intellectually curious, thoughtful, interested in understanding differences rather than just tolerating them. They found they could make each other laugh. Kaelis had dry wit that caught Marcus off guard with its sharpness, and Marcus's self-deprecating humor and stories about diplomatic misadventures amused her in ways that formal Velanthari humor apparently didn't. They started actually looking forward to their scheduled courtship meetings, not because of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But complications mounted. Conservative noble faction actively worked to undermine the courtship, spreading rumors that Marcus was manipulating the princess, that humans were unsuitable for royal bonding, that this would weaken empire. There were protests outside palace from Velanthari citizens, who viewed human Velanthari royal bonding as unacceptable dilution of their species' purity. Marcus faced pressure from Earth diplomatic mission. His supervisor expressed concern he was being used as political pawn rather than genuine partner, worried his judgment was compromised, suggested he should slow down or reconsider. Kaelis faced threats from advisors that they would support rival succession claims if she persisted in unsuitable match. The crisis point came when courtship reached stage where Kaelis had to present Marcus to Council of Houses, governing body of noble families, whose approval was technically required for royal bonding. The council meeting was an intimidating experience, with dozens of high-ranking nobles asking Marcus pointed questions about his background, his understanding of Velanthari culture, his intentions toward the princess, whether he could possibly be suitable consort given his species and status. Many questions were barely concealed hostility, challenging his worthiness, questioning his motivations, suggesting he was opportunist seeking power through royal connection. Marcus handled interrogation with honesty and respect, but refused to pretend to be more than he was. I am human. I will never fully understand all aspects of Velanthari culture with the depth that someone raised in your society would. But I respect your culture deeply. I am committed to continued learning, and I care about Princess Kaelis genuinely, not because of her title, but because of who she is as person. Her intelligence, her strength, her dry humor, her frustration with being treated as political asset rather than individual, these are what drew me to her. If the council believes that's insufficient basis for courtship, I understand, but it's the truth of my feelings. What really shifted opinion wasn't just his words but Kaelis's defense of him. She stood before the council and spoke with authority she'd never quite wielded before, her patterns displaying determination and her ears positioned in challenge. I have rejected 42 nobles that this council deemed suitable because they saw me as nothing beyond political asset. Ambassador Reid sees me. He treats me with respect and genuine interest. He makes me happy in ways I've never experienced in formal courtship proceedings. If this council believes that my personal happiness and genuine partnership are less important than maintaining species prejudice and traditional expectations, then perhaps this council's priorities require reevaluation. It wasn't complete victory. Many council members still opposed match strongly, but enough were swayed by her passionate defense and Marcus's genuine character that they didn't formally block courtship, instead giving conditional approval dependent on continued observation and successful completion of remaining courtship stages. After the ordeal, Marcus and Kaelis finally had brief private moment in garden courtyard. They were both exhausted and stressed, and they discussed whether continuing was worth the mounting pressure. "This is harder than I anticipated," Kaelis admitted. "I knew there would be opposition, but facing it constantly is wearing." "We could stop," Marcus said quietly. "It would be politically awkward but less complicated than proceeding. I don't want you to continue this if it's causing more pain than happiness." Kaelis looked at him, her patterns shifting through colors indicating she was wrestling with complex emotions. "Do you want to stop?" "No. I want to keep trying, want to see where this leads, because what we're building feels real and valuable, but only if you want that too." "I want that too. Despite the difficulties, despite the opposition, I want to build this with you. I just needed to know you felt the same way." They reached for each other's hands, a gesture that was acceptable at their courtship stage though still somewhat daring, and stood together in the garden while Velanth's twin moons rose, committed to continuing despite not knowing how it would end, but believing that what they had was worth the struggle. 6 months into a courtship that had been simultaneously wonderful and exhausting, Marcus and Kaelis stood at a decision point: formalize their bond or end the courtship. By this stage, they'd completed all the formal courtship requirements, had been granted privacy for deeper conversations, had navigated dozens of political challenges, and had built something that felt genuine and solid despite the external pressures. They'd grown to genuinely love each other, though expressing it across cultural differences required constant communication and patience. Marcus had become surprisingly good at reading Kaelis's ear positions and bioluminescent patterns, understanding her emotional states in ways even some Velanthari nobles didn't. Kaelis had learned to appreciate human emotional expressiveness and found Marcus's warmth and spontaneity refreshing after a lifetime of Velanthari formality. But they both still carried fears. They were in the palace gardens late one evening, finally alone without chaperones, a privilege earned through successful completion of earlier courtship stages, and they were being brutally honest about their concerns. Kaelis spoke first. "I'm terrified of the political fallout if we proceed with formal bonding. Significant portion of nobility will never fully accept human consort. There will be attempts to undermine my authority, challenges to any potential succession plans, constant scrutiny of our relationship looking for signs of failure. I worry that bonding with you might weaken my ability to rule effectively when the time comes." Marcus nodded, his own concerns surfacing. "I'm terrified of inadequacy. I've learned enormous amount about Velanthari culture these past months, but I'll always be the human who doesn't quite understand all the subtleties, who makes small protocol errors, who can never fully integrate into royal court in ways a Velanthari consort would. I worry about becoming liability to you rather than genuine partner, about my presence causing more problems than my partnership is worth." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their fears hanging between them. Then Kaelis reached for his hand, a gesture that still felt significant despite being allowed now. "But what have we built together despite these fears? We've proven that human and Velanthari can understand each other deeply, can form genuine partnership honoring both cultures. Our relationship has already changed attitudes. Many who initially opposed have softened seeing your genuine respect and effort. Earth's perception of Velanthari has improved through your reports showing our society's complexity and values. We've demonstrated that the species barrier isn't absolute. And you've challenged your own culture's assumptions," Marcus added. "Shown that personal happiness and genuine partnership have value beyond pure political calculation. That's significant regardless of whether we ultimately succeed long-term. So what do we do? Proceed knowing success isn't guaranteed, or play it safe and end things before potential failure becomes scandal? Marcus thought carefully before answering. I think we proceed. We've come this far, built something real, proven we can navigate complications together. Yes, bonding will bring new challenges. Yes, there's risk of failure. But there's also possibility of building something remarkable, partnership that strengthens both our peoples while making us personally happy. That seems worth the risk to me, if it does to you. Kaelis's patterns shifted to warm colors indicating affection and determination. It does. I want to build future with you, Marcus. I want to face these challenges together rather than separately. I want to prove that what we have isn't just pleasant courtship, but foundation for lasting partnership. They decided to proceed with formal bonding, and the preparations became political event as much as personal celebration. The ceremony was designed to incorporate both Velanthari royal marriage protocols and human wedding traditions, creating hybrid ritual honoring both cultures. It would be broadcast across both civilizations, attended by representatives from multiple governments, framed as historic moment in human-Velanthari relations. The pressure was enormous, but they were committed. The bonding ceremony itself was extraordinary. It took place in the Grand Hall where Marcus had first seen Kaelis 6 months earlier, but transformed with decorations blending Velanthari elegant aesthetic with human elements. Flowers from Earth, alongside Velanthari bioluminescent plants, music incorporating both species traditions, ceremonial items from both cultures. Thousands watched in person, billions more across both civilizations through broadcast. Some watched with genuine joy for the couple and hope for improved human-Velanthari relations. Some watched with skepticism, expecting failure. Some watched with hostility, viewing this as betrayal of species purity. But everyone watched because it was undeniably significant. Marcus and Kaelis stood together before both human and Velanthari officiants, wearing attire that blended both traditions. They exchanged vows they'd written together, each speaking first in their native language, then translating for the other's people. Kaelis vowed in Velanthari formal style. I, Princess Kaelis, choose Marcus Reid as bond partner and equal. I commit to learning from human perspective while sharing Velanthari wisdom. I will build future honoring both our peoples while creating something uniquely ours. I will support him as he supports me, respect him as he respects me, love him as he loves me, for all the years we share. Marcus responded with human emotional directness. I, Marcus Reid, choose Kaelis as my wife and partner. I promise to respect Velanthari culture while bringing human warmth and flexibility. I'll support you in royal duties while being genuine partner who sees you as person, not just princess. I'll prove that love can bridge any distance when both people are committed to the journey. I'll face whatever challenges come because facing them with you is better than facing anything alone. When the officiants declared them bonded, the hall erupted in mixed reaction, cheers and celebration from supporters, polite applause from neutral parties, stony silence from opponents. But Marcus and Kaelis only saw each other, their joy in this moment transcending the political complexity surrounding them. The reception and following months brought continued challenges. They faced ongoing opposition from conservative factions in both species. They had to negotiate complex questions about where they'd primarily live, how Marcus would function as consort in royal court, how to balance Velanthari protocols with Marcus's more informal human nature. They dealt with criticism and scrutiny and constant pressure to prove their relationship served broader political purposes rather than just personal satisfaction. But they also found unexpected sources of support and gradually built life together that worked for them. Marcus took on role as unofficial human Velanthari cultural liaison, using his position to facilitate better understanding between species. Kaelis used her platform to advocate for more flexible approach to interspecies relations. Together they demonstrated that genuine partnership across vast cultural differences was possible with effort and communication and mutual respect. 3 years after their bonding, they had children, twins, made possible through careful genetic engineering that combined human and Velanthari genetics. The twins had characteristics of both species: human facial structure with Velanthari ears, human coloring with subtle Velanthari bioluminescent patterns that shifted with their emotions. They were beautiful and healthy and unprecedented, and their very existence became a powerful political statement about what was possible when species barriers were challenged. 5 years after Kaelis' impulsive yes, they stood together at anniversary celebration, having built life that was complicated but genuine. They'd faced opposition and proved their bond strong enough to weather it. They'd changed attitudes in both species, demonstrated that genuine connection could form across vast cultural divides. They'd created family that literally bridged two worlds. During quiet moment away from the celebration, Marcus asked Kaelis something he'd wondered about for years. What actually made you say yes that first day? I've never fully understood what you saw in that moment that made you make such impulsive decision. Kaelis considered the question seriously before answering, her patterns shifting thoughtfully. I had spent 5 years evaluating suitors based on logic and strategy, analyzing compatibility according to traditional measures, and none of them felt right despite being objectively suitable. Then I saw you, genuinely curious about our culture rather than pretending expertise, respectfully uncertain rather than arrogantly confident, treating me like person with thoughts and feelings rather than political prize to be won. And something in my instincts just knew. It wasn't logical analysis. It was recognition of rightness I'd been missing in all the suitable matches. I said yes without thinking, because thinking was what had kept me from finding this connection for so long. Marcus smiled, pulling her closer. I'm glad your instincts overrode your logic that day. Best impulsive decision anyone's ever made in my presence. Agreed, though it has been considerably more work than I anticipated when making it. Building life with you, navigating all these cultural and political complications, it's been challenging. Worth it though? Absolutely. Every complication, every challenge, every moment of having to prove ourselves to skeptics, all worth it for what we've built together. Their children, Myra and Kaelin, now 2 years old and managing to combine human energy with Velanthari grace in ways that were simultaneously adorable and exhausting, came running over demanding attention, and Marcus and Kaelis laughed, falling into domestic family life they'd created that bridged two worlds. They picked up their children, returning to the celebration where representatives from dozens of species had gathered not just to honor their anniversary, but to celebrate what their union represented. Later that evening, after guests departed and children were finally asleep, Marcus and Kaelis stood in their private quarters looking out at Velanth Prime's twin moons. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked quietly. Saying yes to me instead of accepting one of those suitable Velanthari nobles. Kaelis turned to face him, her patterns glowing with colors he'd learned indicated deep affection and contentment. Not once. Not even in the hardest moments when the political pressure felt overwhelming. You've made me happier than I knew was possible. You've shown me that partnership can be about genuine connection rather than just strategic alliance. You've given me family I love and future I'm excited about. How could I possibly regret that? Even though it's been complicated. Especially because it's been complicated. Easy things aren't usually worthwhile. We've built something remarkable precisely because we've had to work for it, had to prove it to ourselves and everyone else, had to learn how to bridge vast cultural differences through patience and communication and love. That's more valuable than any effortless traditional match could have been. Marcus pulled her close, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Two beings from different worlds who'd found each other through one impulsive word, and built something neither could have imagined alone. Outside their quarters, two civilizations continued their complicated relationship, gradually improving through diplomatic work and cultural exchange, but also through the simple, powerful example of two people who proved that love could bridge any distance when both parties were brave enough to say yes without overthinking, when they were willing to do the work of understanding and compromise, when they recognized that sometimes the most logical choice is following instinct about who makes you happy, and then committing to building something real together despite all the rational reasons why it should be impossible. And it all started because a princess looked at a human diplomat and in one instant of recognition said yes, before she could talk herself out of it.